Welcome to the next episode of the Vox Juris podcast. My name is Gellert, and the goal of this podcast is to educate law students about career opportunities through the stories and insights of professionals. And now, let me introduce my guest for today's episode. Mr. Dunnen is a distinguished lecturer and module coordinator in the International and European Law program at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. He holds an LLM in European, International and Comparative Law from the University of Maastricht. He teaches in areas such as the law of international organizations, peace and security. He is mentoring students on the Year 4 applied research projects, and he is the coach of the student team participating in the National Model United Nations in New York. Mr. Dunnen, welcome to the Vox Juris podcast, and I am honored to have you join me today.
Thank you very much, Gellert, for having me.
My first question to you, Mr. Dunnen, is the following. What motivated you to study law and eventually to become a lecturer?
Good question. Initially, I didn't plan on studying law. I think when I grew up, it was the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall, when I became aware of the world. I was following the news and I became interested in international relations. And by the time I had to choose my studies, I was looking at several universities in the Netherlands, as I'm Dutch, to look for studies that would fit, that would be interesting for me. And so I looked around at studies, political sciences, international relations, history, that sort of thing, and also law. And at first, I think choosing law for me felt like a safe compromise, a solid, respected studies that will secure you a job. But I think my heart was mostly with international relations, politics, history, that sort of thing. So I always was most happy when law courses touched on history, politics, international relations. Yeah.
I see. Thank you for sharing that. Next up, many law students struggle to find effective study habits at the beginning of their studies, especially when it comes to preparing for exams. Thinking back about your student years, how did you prepare for exams, and do you think that there is a right way to study law?
Good question. It's different for everyone. So people should not feel obliged to follow one specific type of preparing or studying. For myself, it really helped to sort of study in a way that sort of continuously prepared me for an assessment. So to not postpone preparation, but to, from the beginning of a module to do as if the exam was around the corner. And so this continuous preparation helps you to sort of spread the workload, to build on things you're learning, and to have the time to repeat them and to revisit them. And that way they will stick. And that's a good way of knowledge retention. So for me, that was a helpful way of going into assessments to have the feeling, I'm always ready. And that also allows you for some slacking or falling ill midway, at some unpredictable point, because you're on track anyway. So it doesn't worsen things, it's just a minor hiccup. One thing I think I underestimated and I learned later is the need to give words to your knowledge or your lack of knowledge. So whenever I'm studying, to say it out loud, to look at a point in the distance or at my bookshelves or wherever, or speak to a friend or a colleague to articulate my thoughts. And that way you notice that you're not quite there yet. Or you immediately notice by hearing yourself, oh, here's a gap. Here's where I need follow-up. Here's where I need additional research or materials, perhaps. And so that's something I didn't do quite enough at Maastricht, I felt. And I noticed that that's a sort of a flaw or a risk of studying by yourself individually. I think many of us feel, group work, burden, I'd rather work on my own. Oftentimes as a tutor, when I speak to students, they tell me I prefer working individually, studying individually. But it has its limitations. And I think we need to be mindful of that. That bouncing off our ideas against another helps us to learn.
First of all, I couldn't agree more that continuous learning is a very effective way of making sure that you are prepared when the exam comes. And next, regarding studying together with others in a group and studying individually, I think the right way is somewhere in between with a balance. For example, I always prepare for the exams at first individually by myself.
Yeah.
And when the exam date is approaching, I schedule some study sessions, some revision sessions with my friends, with my classmates. And that is, as you said, the point when you realize maybe I need to work a little bit more on this part or this topic of the subject.
Exactly, yeah.
And building on that, did you use any particular study techniques during your student years?
Yes. What I would do is mostly through note-taking. So I would, when reading the materials, when sitting in class, I would take notes, and that would allow me to not having to revisit the full book, for instance, for my exam anymore. I would have sort of summaries in my own writing. And I think doing that digitally, because at the time I mostly took manual notes, pen and paper, that becomes messy. So doing it on a computer in a file, it allows you to bring together everything from the class, the lecture, the workshop, the materials, later insights, and questions. I would scribble in the margin, for instance. So, for instance, when a lecturer was teaching, for instance, on my exchange in France, it was in French, not my first or second language, so I struggled to make sense of it. And then when the professor was speaking, I would scribble in the margins words that I kept on hearing that I didn't understand. So I would look it up at home in the dictionary. Those were the days of paper dictionaries and all that. And I would write down the answer in the same margin and circle it so that I knew, oh, he's saying this, and I would look at the same sheet. Oh, now I know it. There's the answer. And so take notes immediately on the spot. It allows you to not only write down what you know, but also what you do not know and what you need to know.
And from your perspective as a lecturer, what advice would you give to those law students who would like to bring the most out of their university years academically?
I think they should actively look out for opportunities that are offered. So not just by the program, but by the university, by associations, student associations that are connected to the city. Because lots of things are going on that we are not aware of if we just sit back and think it's coming our way. So, also talk to other students, sharing interests. They can give you tips, say, hey, did you look at that? Or I saw this great event happening downtown tomorrow evening. Shall we go there? So actively looking for opportunities, because it's not just a topic that may be interesting, but also the people you meet there for networking purposes, to get to know what are the people working in this field. How can I talk to them? Super scary at first. Sometimes you don't feel like it. You don't have to do it each time. But whenever you feel like it, it makes sense to reach out, because they're interested in you as well.
Choosing a specialization is something many students worry about, and it can feel like a big decision early on. Thinking back to your own path, how clear was it for you which area of law you wanted to specialize in?
It was not clear at first. So when I went to Maastricht University, I went to a program called European Law School. It was heavily EU law focused, for obvious reasons, Maastricht being host to the 1992 the treaty establishing the EU. And at the time I was very intrigued, very much intrigued and interested in European integration. What does it mean to be European? I felt very excited, looking across the border, very interested in European developments, history, politics, culture. So for me that was a natural step from, my small town high school to this university with this European focus. And only through studying, it was a 4-year program. I actually studied 5 years, but that's another story. I increasingly became interested in international law. So it wasn't my choice at first. It became an interest over time, because the program included elements of comparative law and international law, like we have here in The Hague.
I see. Thank you for sharing that. Regarding your internship, in 2001, you interned at the European Parliament. Can you please describe to me what your key tasks and responsibilities were in that position?
Thanks. That's been a while, right? That was the time of 9/11. So I was on internship in Brussels when the terrorist attacks on the United States happened, and also the European institutions were evacuated. So it was a very weird time, and we had to vacate the building immediately because they thought Brussels would be the next target, and NATO headquarters and everything. Who knows what was going on at the time? So this internship was with a member of the European Parliament, a Dutch politician from the European People's Party, and it was a great opportunity for me to apply my knowledge in a sort of a, real life, stressful, dynamic environment. And I had several tasks. This MEP had 2 assistants in Brussels that I assisted as an intern. And so there was a range of tasks. It was very much assisting on very different things that an internship typically entails. And so one of the tasks was to accompany the assistants or the MEP to meetings, for instance, committee meetings of the Parliament, the committees she was a member of, transportation, economic monetary affairs. She was on different committees. And then report on what was discussed, decided, but also meetings at her office where she would have guests, colleagues, and then I would sit in to take notes. So sort of a minute-taking task. She knew that I liked writing, so she had me at some point write her speeches. She would deliver many speeches. She was a guest speaker at many events, she had many side things going on, and advisory consultancy tasks she was doing, and I would write certain speeches for her as well. So it was very exciting, but also very much practical stuff that an intern typically does: logistical, practical support, planning things. Calling people for setting a meeting, inquiring availability, and making sure that there's coffee, getting the copies on the table. So all sorts of things. I drove her car to Strasbourg for the monthly session. So that's sort of the interns are used for many things.
I see. Thank you for sharing that. And building on this topic, what advice would you give to law students who would like to intern at the European Parliament today? And how do you think they can excel once they are in that position?
The European Parliament specifically is, of course, very much a political body. consisting of political groups, consisting of parties from the member states. And so it is a natural fit, I think, for students who have political interest, not just legal interest. So I would recommend, if you're interested in the European Parliament, to consider becoming politically active. And that can be at local level, municipal level, or in the youth movement of your political party, or the party you're interested in, or the political color you feel comfortable with or attracted to. And then take it from there. At different levels of government and governance. There are politicians of those parties, and so all the way up to the European Parliament, those MEPs are elected, and they need assistance, and they're looking out for talented young people who have the interest in their work, the affinity with the political choices and preferences the MEP makes, but also know how politics works in a big parliament with many parties, the difficulty of people being far apart, and then finding still connections and common ground even on small issues, the art of compromise. So as a Dutchman with a very fragmented parliament here, I felt sort of well equipped to go to Brussels. So yeah, political affinity, that's important, I think, for working for the European Parliament.
I see.
For an MEP then, yeah.
And for law students who plan on working at international organizations like the UN or the WHO, what concrete steps should they take while still in university?
Start by looking at their websites and their vacancies and their requirements. So what sort of entry-level jobs do they typically have on offer, or even their internships? What do they look like? What are the descriptions? And what are the requirements? So look out for what the organizations themselves set out in terms of requirements, conditions, and if you know now, in your first or second year of your law school, you can work towards them. Because if those organizations and perhaps those jobs pique your interest, you now know what it takes to do them, to conduct that work. And so I would really look at what it's typically asking for, and the more you look around, the more you see similarities and patterns. And I'm sure we'll come to that, the importance of certain skills and certain knowledge over other things.
And for students interested in choosing an international law topic for their applied research project, which themes or issues would you suggest they consider?
Yeah, the ARP, of course, is client-driven. So we have to be mindful that students, of course, are in that sense not in the driver's seat as to topic. It is what demand is out there. So, of course, as a student, you look out for clients, and you would prioritize those clients that you find interesting in the areas that you're good at or that you like. But eventually, the client is in charge and in the lead as to what they want, what they need. But what I think is a good point. The student does have an influence. You can make clear, these are my strengths, and these are the requirements for my program. Let's find a way where the two come together. Your question as a client, or your need, and what I can offer. Somehow we have to find the match there. But it's not like that that the student can determine the question, but you can influence also by the knowledge you have. So to, for instance, hear out the client and then, activating your knowledge. If they describe something that they come across, perhaps they're a businessman, or they're at an NGO, or this is an organization or a bank, and your client is not a lawyer, but they describe their problem. Translate it into legal terms. How is that a legal problem? How could I help? What's the legal angle here? What could be meaningful for me to contribute? And so that way you can steer the client's question.
I see. Thank you for answering those questions. Next up, many students feel intimidated by the idea of pursuing a career in public international law because of its competitiveness. How would you address the concerns of those students?
It's not easy. It's true. Particularly when we discuss the United Nations, for instance, and that's a massive system, the UN family, all the organizations around the world that students are interested in for a career. The UN system is facing a liquidity crisis, and so there's a problem in terms of funding, and so employment at the UN is under pressure, and across the UN system. They're cutting down, they're reconsidering operations and missions around the world, including peacekeeping. And so that is vulnerable, and that is problematic. In the Netherlands as well, when I started working in the program, we would have tribunals here in The Hague that took on many of our students on internship, but that have now closed down. The International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, only a residual mechanism is now left and about, of course, to be wrapped up in due course. So employers also come and go because there's new tribunals established as well, Kosovo Chambers being an example. So we need this, open-mindedness and flexibility to adjust to a changing labor market, to organizations that shrink or grow or disappear altogether, and new organizations that are being established because new opportunities arise. We may talk about artificial intelligence at some point. New bodies will be established for that. New regulatory bodies, perhaps, where expertise of our students is looked after, is looked for. So I do think that it requires open-mindedness, and where one door closes, another door opens.
And do you think that there are specific courses, internships, or experiences you believe are especially helpful for building a career in public international law?
I would recommend a broad range of courses. And so for many of those questions, my answer would be don't put your eggs in one basket, but spread. Spread across topics in this case and courses that you find interesting and that are relevant for the area you're interested in working in the future. And the further away you're from your career, for instance, you're in your first year of law studies, you may not have a clear understanding exactly of where you want to go, where you want to end up, and that's perfectly all right. And so allow yourself the sort of the freedom to study the width of law and of related areas. So the whole range of topics that may be relevant at some point. And no course, no module is irrelevant, is a lost cause. Because there's always underlying principles that are relevant across courses. There's always skills you develop even without noticing that are transferable to other disciplines and professions. And so, use the opportunity to choose electives, minors in your third year, go on exchange, as I did myself, and study courses that you find fascinating. because that same fascination will have you look for a job. And so there's always a pattern in what you end up doing, even without noticing. So don't feel obliged, oh, I must check these boxes, otherwise I won't get in. When I had my interview for the European Parliament internship, the MEP asked me she glanced across my CV and she said, you did have some courses about the internal market, right? Okay, good. So it was sort of a diagonally reading a CV. You should, of course, have the basics. When you're applying for the European Parliament, of course, you should have European law. But she's not checking off, do you have those 16 specific topics passed with this sort of grade and this sort of... No, that's typically not how it works.
Mr. Dunnen, I have one more question from the first section.
Mm-hmm.
In 2016, you completed a summer course in Public International Law at the Hague Academy of International Law. Based on your experience, would you encourage students to take part in this course?
Totally, absolutely, 100%. Perhaps not right away. I recommend completing the bachelor's first. It is an advanced course. It's also taken by, professionals, master students, PhD students, and it's a really great experience to meet people from around the world interested and knowledgeable in the field of public international law. There's also a separate series in private international law. To develop also your language skills, because it's bilingual, English-French, with simultaneous translations. So you would be able to follow it entirely in English and to also contribute in English, but some of the speakers speak in French, and you would have simultaneous translations by an interpreter through your headphones. But it's amazing, you're taught by the judges of the ICJ. So when I took the module in 2016, Judge Benouna, the Moroccan judge in the ICJ at the time, was the one leading the general course, so sort of a series of lectures throughout the summer school. And then professionals from around the world, from different jurisdictions, a Chinese professor, we had Sean Murphy on Law of the Sea, the American professor. Great experience. You would have an opportunity to do field trips with them, to visit, also to meet with the ICJ judges, for hearing about their careers and their thoughts about things going on in international law. So definitely recommend it, but it is an effort and an investment. So it does have I think a significant fee to register, and it of course takes place in summer, so you have to sacrifice some of your summer holidays for that. So in the middle of the summer heat, you're stuck at the Peace Palace. So you have to be all dressed up formally, so you have to be mindful of that. And it takes reading, it takes preparation. It's not a class. You don't have to sit an exam. There's an optional choice to have for the best and brightest, to have a sort of an assessment at the end for which you can be awarded sort of a recognition, but that's exceptional. But all participants get a certificate of participation, and then it really depends on you how much you contribute in the discussions. So you would have a big lecture, for instance, by in my case Judge Benouna, and then later the next day he would run sort of an interactive workshop where you can actually discuss with him and answer his questions, ask him questions about a specific case or specific topic going on in the world or in international law. So it does, but they do provide you quite some reading. So not unknown to our students, many of those cases, but it is advanced. So it does take preparation. So in that sense, it is an investment, but it's 100% paying off.
I see. Mr. Dunnen, thank you for sharing your early experiences. Now I would like to shift the focus to your professional roles today, particularly to your work as a lecturer. Can you please describe to me, what does your day-to-day work look like as a lecturer at THUAS?
Thanks for the question. And when you suggested that question to me in the preparations, I thought, would this be interesting for the audience? Because I think one of the most exciting aspects of my work is actually the thing students already know what I'm doing in the classroom, the connection we're making to the students, and the teaching going on. Because much of the work behind the scenes, I think, is a bit more mundane or, very practical organizational stuff that I don't think is very interesting for me to explain. But I can summarize it to say it's about cycles. So what students are seeing in the classroom is only part of a larger cycle. So a module requires preparation, then being run, and then being wrapped up and evaluated. So it's a loop, and we are only meeting the students in parts of that loop, mostly in the middle, right, when the modules run. But it does take, behind the scenes, in meetings of lecturers, behind our desks, at home, it does take our time and effort to prepare a module. That the knowledge is there, the materials are ready, book lists are made, course descriptions are developed as a team. Typically it's not a one-man effort, one-woman effort, it is a team effort. So you have to get everybody on board in several meetings for preparation. And then running the course is also a team effort. Which lecturer teaches what, when, how. We have to align that. Ideally we align across modules. So as a module coordinator also should speak, and I think I should do that more, but that's a different topic, to other module coordinators, because for instance in year 1 Model United Nations now I'm teaching practice and skills, legal analysis and advice. But at the same time Private Law 1 is running, practice and skills, teaching, legal analysis and advice. So it's important for us to align our messages, for us not to duplicate them towards the students, that they hear the same thing twice, or even worse, that we leave gaps or contradict one another. Not likely, but it could be a risk, right? So it's important for a coordinator to also behind the scenes coordinate with others beyond the module that we are coordinating, and coordinate within the module, that the various lecturers, we are 2 and a practice and skills instructor on MUN, that we share the workload and that we know each other who's doing what by when. Also preparation for the assessment, so by when what sort of questions need to be ready. In MUN it's different, of course. You have the portfolio of products and simulated professional performance, of course, the PPPs and the SPPs, but they need preparation, not just by ourselves, but with the body of knowledge lecturers. So it's again a coordination efforts. Their knowledge, our skills in one deliverable. And we are responsible on the MUN side for that being done well and timely. So it is a cycle with lots of coordination going on, particularly if you are a coordinator, obviously. But also after the module is done, it's not over and done with. We need to take stock of exam results. We need to take stock of portfolio results. What's the passing rate? And for exam questions, Remindo has a very intricate system in place where it gives feedback on the quality of a question. Was it valid? Was it representative? And there's numerical indicators for that. And questions that have potential issues there are flagged by the system. We have to revisit them, because we build a question bank that we expand every year, but we use questions that some of which we tweak for a next year exam. And so we need to know that the question that we're using, the fundamental question, is actually good. If it's not, we have to either toss it out or revisit it thoroughly, revise it. So that sort of behind the scenes work is something that students don't see, but I think is essential to the quality of our education.
Building on this topic, what step-by-step advice would you give to law students who would like to build a career in academia in law, such as a lecturer in the Netherlands?
Well, as a lawyer I say it depends. That's not very satisfactory, is it? It does depend on your own preferences, your own choices. Never feel obliged to follow one certain path because somebody else followed that path. I do think it's valuable for a classroom, particularly for the students, but also for the lecturer, to have some experience under your belt. So to come in with certain real-life experience and knowledge. How does this apply in practice? How do lawyers really work? What do they really prioritize in a dynamic, challenging environment where targets are set, time is short? Do you then have time for a full IRAC? That sort of thing. Or would you have to, start from IRAC, but then next step is to what does the problem of this client really hinge on? So focusing, targeting because of time, and of time is money for the client and for the boss. So my advice would be to acquire real-life experience, and our students are doing that through internship, but that's of course a fairly limited experience, but to acquire that experience before going into education, because I think some of the best professors I had came in from had joined education only at a later stage or relatively later after first having worked in legal practice or elsewhere. Again, politics, one of the most inspiring lecturers in Maastricht was one who was an active politician, and he would just sit back and ramble freely about his experiences and the things he learned over the decades of working in international organizations, and that inspired me more than somebody who knows the textbook and can explain the textbook to me, but I'm not 100% sure if they knew how to apply it in real life. So the real life application is a real good preparation for becoming a professor or a lecturer.
Now, public international law is constantly evolving, and staying up to date and informed can be challenging. As someone who actively teaches and conducts research in this field, how do you stay updated on legal trends and developments in public international law?
You have to make time for it. A great tip I once got from a former team leader of mine, Barbara Heze, one of the co-founders of the law program, is your inbox, your email inbox, is not your to-do list. So don't let somebody else set your to-do list. So sometimes you have to, I shouldn't advise here not read your email. I want to say make sure to plan well. So allow yourself the time to study and to stay abreast of developments and of developments in the legal field as well. So that's what I'm doing. You may not want to start every day by switching on Outlook or Teams or whatever messaging tool you use. You may want to deliberately have it switched off, if circumstances allow, to devote the morning to self-study, to read up on this important topic, to catch up on the latest journal article in this area you're specializing in, to go to the Peace Palace Library. Great reading room, but it takes also time. There's so much to navigate there, certain materials you have to order, also taking time from the archive. So it's a matter of timing. And I wouldn't want to use the excuse, I don't have time. Time is something that is available to us and that we have to sort of fill in. And there we can make choices. And not everything is dictated to us. And so we can play with the time. But we have to prioritize what's really important to us. If that's, learning exciting new things, if that's staying abreast of developments, if that's investing in our career, then prioritize that over other things that may seem important, but certain things that seem important or urgent solve themselves sometimes without you having to step in. So, yeah, don't let always others dictate what you should do, but allow yourself the time also to visit conferences. I look out for interesting conferences in the field, in The Hague and elsewhere, to see if I can join them. Sometimes just a seminar in the afternoon or evening doesn't need to take much time. It doesn't have to be a multi-day conference abroad, also very costly, but something that can be very cheap and accessible. But it's really nice to hear the latest from experts or practitioners. That's just around the corner. And over coffee there or a drink, you meet again interesting people.
Now, as a lecturer, do you see student access to AI services like ChatGPT as more of a benefit or a challenge for their legal education?
It's a fact. It's there. It's out there, and it's there to stay. It will become ubiquitous. So we have little choice. And so what you notice here at the university and in the law program, but also outside, is that it is, of course, a hot topic because of its rapid, its nature, and its impact, but also its rapid development. Where is it going? How, intrusive will it be? And so what you notice here at the university in our program is that we haven't wrapped our heads around the way we deal with it. And there's no clear uniform policy about the use of generative AI in assignments, for instance. So you see different modules having rules and regulations, but slightly differently across modules. What I'm noticing is that there's a movement now towards more proactively engaging with it. The genie is out of the bottle, and so let's make sure we make the best of it, and to engage with it, because it has benefits. It has also risks, but definitely benefits as well. And I'm seeing a movement towards embedding it into our program because we see that development in the field, in the work field. Students will, and professionals, the students as the future professionals, will be expected to know what AI is, how it works, its opportunities and risks, and to work with that, to use it to their benefit and be mindful of avoiding the risks and the pitfalls, and be very proactive in staying abreast of the legal developments. Also, what are the regulations coming out of the university about what I can and cannot do? So, to give an example, in one of the modules I've been teaching, in year 3, Conflict, Peace and Security, we published a fairly clear AI policy for the assignment. And now I'm reading the assignment submissions, and I do feel that not all submissions, that's my feeling, comply with the regulation, with the policy we set out. And that may be a problem. So we may have to end up referring such a submission to the exam board, because it may be an inappropriate use of the AI, and that may amount to fraud, because it is an external intelligence that writes something for you. And so you have to be... our rules in this module say that that is permitted to a very limited extent with full acknowledgement. And so if you have several indicators there where students write something that includes, and that's what I've read until now, one submission that included a fact that was not in the fact pattern that we gave them, that may be a sign that there's an AI hallucinating here. When I then read this very slick generic language that I don't recognize from the module and our discussions in the class, and when I'm not seeing footnotes with citations to the sources from the module or about the topics, taken together, these are indicators to me that there may be fraud going on. So there is risks to AIs, but it's there to stay, and we need to make the best of it.
I understand. Now, moving on, Mr. Dunnen, what do you find the most rewarding about teaching law students?
It's the rapport, I think. The rapport in the classroom, inside and outside of the classroom, when sharing topics that we both find interesting and exciting, so that we recognize that in one another. I talk about something, or they raise something that triggers something with me, or that triggers something with them, and so that rapport that keeps me going. And I think that's also what keeps students going, that they recognize a passion with the lecturer, or genuine interest, at least in their questions.
I see.
Yeah.
From my perspective, I remember several workshops that I had when by the end of the workshop, so not at the beginning, but by the end of the workshop, there was a clear harmony between the students and the teachers' work.
Right, okay.
And I have to say that is quite enjoyable.
It is absolutely. When you see that coming together, and that you've achieved something. Yeah, that's something you do together. And as a lecturer, I want to be mindful of that it is a joint enterprise, because the risk of me studying a topic every year, I'm a lecturer in the program now for 15 years, teaching many of those in those same areas as I taught 10, 15 years ago, is that I sort of take so much for granted that you may lose your audience when you start at that end point, when you dive in only at the deep end. In class you should start at the beginning to explain something. And so the more, and I think that may also be a tip for students, the more you become knowledgeable in something, paradoxically, the harder it may become to explain it to others, because you know so much, or that's the risk, that you lose your audience and that you take things for granted. So when explaining something to somebody else, always keep in mind, who's my audience, what do they know, what's their interest, what's their question, but also to start an explanation from the beginning. An explanation needs to be step by step. So that's always something I try to keep in mind.
Next up, what did your day-to-day work look like as an editor of the Netherlands Atlantic Association?
Thanks for the question. It was my previous job. That's a small Dutch think tank here in The Hague, the Netherlands Atlantic Association. That is an association funded by the Dutch Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Defense, and on a project basis by NATO. And as it is a small organization, my work entailed a lot of different tasks, very practical stuff as well that I was used to from my internship as well. So no surprises there. The editor role was being essentially responsible for the publications of the association, including a journal, the Atlantic Perspective, a Dutch journal on international security, and that was published at the time 7 times a year. Now less frequently, it's gone digital as well, but at the time it was a paper publication, and and being editor of other publications of the organization as they would be created, like books, conference reports, etc. So lot of reading, lots of writing as well. I would be conducting interviews for the journal. And by reading up on the news, on developments, I would notice not only interesting topics we would want to write about, but also interesting names we want to talk to. So it was very much also a networking organization. We would organize conferences as well, where I would be helping out practically, but also meeting people, can I conduct an interview with you about this topic? So very much a networking thing that was very dynamic. Yeah.
Further expanding on this topic, do you think it is beneficial for law students to enroll into research assistant or editorial roles during their studies, or is it better for them to primarily focus on their coursework while at university?
I shouldn't say it depends. Let me give a different answer. It's vital that you prioritize sort of the minimum requirements. So the coursework, required reading, to be able to know law and to pass the test, right? So that would be a priority. But I think students notice that that's something that won't take 24/7. That allows them, if they have their planning in order and that they are on track, that will allow them to pursue extracurriculars, to do meaningful other things. And that would include being a research assistant, for instance. If that is something you would enjoy. If not, go look for something else. Be active in a student association. As I said, so there's so many opportunities in and around the university, in and around The Hague, that I would definitely sort of tailor it to your own preferences and what excites you. So many nice conferences, free of charge, open to students, nice events going on, related to what we're doing here. Movies That Matter festival, that is, seeing, sometimes really amazing, sometimes confrontational documentaries on, human rights under threat in the world. Things going on that where we see the law apply and also sometimes the law falling short. So there's so much going on that I would definitely make time for.
I see. Mr. Dunnen, thank you for the insights into your professional work. I would like to now move into a broader discussion about international law. And my first question in this section to you is the following. For students who are just starting to learn international law, what do you think is the most effective way to approach such a broad and complex subject?
Again, it's a question of time. To allow yourself the time to take the various steps. That topic consists of various elements that take time to comprehend. So don't rush through things or expect that you can know in a month or half a year an entire area of law. And that's the way the curriculum is designed. So it is designed for a purpose, to at the end of 4 years have the major knowledge and skills in a way that is pedagogically and didactically sound and works in terms of our brains, in terms of knowledge retention, and in terms of skills development. And so, use everything we have on offer. And that includes, for instance, recommended reading. So if you really want to understand the topic, pay attention to what the lecturer, the expert in that field, suggests. Required reading is only the minimum. And recommended is where you really get a wide and richer understanding of the topic. So hear out the lecturer, talk with them, discuss with them in the workshops the moment you meet them, or in the year 3 seminars. So that these would be my recommendations for students.
I see. And in your view, what do you think are the key factors or challenges that influence state compliance with public international law today?
Yeah, very, very important question for international law. Not an easy question. It's not like I have sort of a solution to that. It is, of course, a major question. With all those rules in place, we, as an international community, if that even exists, but as an international community, we've committed to rules at some point. The set of rules has grown, but what if the rules are not complied with? Then there is a problem. So compliance is an important element of the rule of law and of legal protection of the vulnerable, of small states, of victims, of refugees. And there's this famous saying that most rules are complied with most of the time, and I think that is true, because what we're seeing in the news is typically only the non-compliance and the things that go wrong. But if you study more closely the fabric, the regime of international law in its daily practice, and if you talk to practitioners. So for instance, we did the Geneva trip for years in year 2 before COVID. We would visit those organizations, you would hear about their daily practice, things you would not read about in the newspapers, but you would hear that the states in those organizations would get things done, would be able to move forward, even if on mundane topics, not the perhaps big and exciting topics all the time. So yes, it is true that most of the rules are complied with most of the time, but what signal does it send if some of the most visible, most powerful players, some of the great powers in the world, the largest states, very clearly and openly breach rules, and repeatedly doing so, not just one of them, but several of them doing so? What sort of signal does that send? And that is indeed a problematic, the contempt of the rules. Is there? Are we going back in time? Is there a roll back in state practice towards the times before the prohibition of the use of force? And that's a very, in human history, a fairly novel concept, the prohibition of the use of force. It was long considered to be the prerogative of a state to use force in their foreign relations. Are we going back to that time? So these are very, very difficult questions. Here in The Hague, of course, states withdrawing from the International Criminal Court, perhaps some time ago seen as a beacon of hope for justice, for international criminal justice done in some of the most shocking cases of atrocities. So is there a rollback? I think it's too early to tell, because in international relations you oftentimes see sort of a swing, sort of a pendulum, where there's a movement and a counter movement, that people start pushing back, bottom up from local protests, grassroots initiatives, people pushing back to say we don't accept what our leaders are doing, we don't accept what the big powers are doing, and that sometimes triggers change at the higher levels, but also leadership may change. Elections lead to change of leaderships, and all leaders are mortal, and so even leaders in autocracies at some point will die, and then the question is who succeeds them, and that is then a moment of opportunity. So we may see a pendulum swinging the other side and corrections being made. Yeah, so it is a difficult question, but it's got to do with developments in power and in leadership. Great powers of today may not be the great powers of tomorrow. There's rising powers with different worldviews, and leadership changes, and they may have the ability to set agendas. For one example, next year the new Secretary General of the United Nations will be elected. That may be an opportunity for the UN and the international community to rally with new energy behind an international agenda that is much needed with renewed vigor.
I understand. And next up, what do you think will be the most urgent global challenges that international law must adapt to in the next decades?
Yeah, some of which we've spoken about, because nobody can look into the future, so we have to extrapolate from the past developments we expect in the future, and they have to do. We have to consider the developments in power and in leadership, as I said, rising powers and current powers becoming relatively less powerful. Those developments shape the choices that are being made and the things that are considered important. Leadership, what do the leaders find important? As I said, had the example of the UN Secretary General next year elected, being able to hopefully set with renewed vigor a new agenda. That's not to say that the priorities of the leaders are the real priorities of our planet and of the people on the planet. But those reality checks will inevitably occur. You see that now with the Sustainable Development Goals, increasing pushback. I think also related to the growing awareness that we're never going to meet them in 5 years' time. The target is 2030, zero hunger, no poverty in 5 years' time. Can't be done. That's an increasing awareness, unfortunately, but it is an important reality check to revisit those SDGs for their follow-up. They were a successor to the Millennium Development Goals that were a little less expansive. This may be another reality check to go for a more feasible successor. What does our planet and our people really need? And what can we really do? What is achievable? What is feasible with limited means, time? I hope that that will be thoroughly considered and that we will have moving forward on sustainable development goals that rally a broader support. We can't have the United States or China opt out of any of them. And the US has now, the Trump administration has very explicitly opted out of the SDGs, said this is not for us anymore. And that is reflected in their pulling out of the Paris Agreement for climate change. So we have to find a way of getting everybody on board, and that requires very capable diplomacy. When is the time right, with what sort of leadership, to get things done again?
I see. And Mr. Dunnen, how important do you think cultural competence and the language skills are for students who want to work in the field of public international law?
Super important, yes. And I think our students develop them as sort of as they go, and it's part of their DNA. We have such an international group of students speaking so many languages, and by interacting, developing their cross-cultural skills in such a natural way that students are doing it as they go. So they don't even have to, in that sense, actively look out for opportunities there, comparing to, for instance, students in a traditional local law school, right? So, yeah, these are very important. And as I said already, think strategically. What field triggers your interest? Where do you see employment opportunities? or even internship opportunities, and what are their requirements? What sort of languages, if you're interested in and open to learning a new language, and I recommend doing that, what sort of language should I choose? And that would then be strategic thinking. That you do something that you enjoy, but it also has brings benefits.
I see. Mr. Dunnen, thank you for sharing your perspectives on these wider international law-related questions. Now, I would like to, in order to conclude our conversation, I would like to finish with a few final questions.
Sure.
How do you think students can stay motivated in a field that can be challenging and stressful?
It's important, I think, to take good care of yourself. So do what is needed to stay sane, mentally and physically. And so it's down to time again, right? Your studies don't take 24/7. So what does it take you to stay sound in the long run? Do what makes you happy. What you enjoy in your spare time. Whatever hobbies, sports, or socializing you need. So don't resist that, because in the long term that may bite you if you don't do that enough. And do good. I think volunteering is an important advice I want to give, also for career perspectives, because the United Nations has a UN volunteering program to work as a volunteer for the UN, typically free of no reimbursement or salary involved, but it is an invaluable experience for gaining experience, getting to know people in the field, and finding out, is this something for me? So just briefly back to the question about the UN system and how to access it, it is of course now under financial strain, so I would not prioritize per se only the UN system, but if you're looking for opportunities, look for those volunteering opportunities. Not only in the UN system, but other organizations also have not only internship but also volunteering sometimes going on. And look about that career thing, one more thing that came to mind, look at the larger ecosystem in which those organizations work. So if the organizations themselves are under financial duress, how about the NGOs around them, or the law firms or the consultancy firms that advise them? There's a whole ecosystem around them, think tanks, where there may be opportunities still.
I see. My second to last question is the following. Have you ever had a mentor or mentors who impacted your career?
Yes, I briefly mentioned this great professor at Maastricht University who was this sort of a senior. He was a senator in the Dutch Senate. He would look like a senator. He had this curly gray hair and then this tweed jacket, and he would sit back and talk about his experience meeting statesmen and all that sort of thing. So I found it very inspiring. He was a very colorful figure, and he wanted us to read the newspapers, and he talked about the news and that sort of thing. He drifted off all the time, but it was one of the classes I most remember, Comparative Constitutional Law. So that was sort of a role model, I suppose, not really a mentor. In terms of mentor, I think closest for me came senior colleagues when I started in jobs, internships and jobs. A colleague at the Atlantic Association who sort of guided me, who I had a rapport with. But also here, when I started 15 years ago in the program, the program director at the time who founded the program was a mentor of sorts to me. He really, I found him very inspiring, and I enjoyed working with him. And he I think acted as a mentor of sorts in the early years for me. Yeah.
And finally, if you could give one advice to all aspiring law students, what would that be?
Yeah, I think we've covered so much ground that
The advice is out there.
the advice is out there, and yeah, see if you can use it. I would recommend considering those pieces of advice. So in addition, listen to all your podcasts. More interesting people coming up.
Yes, absolutely. Mr. Dunnen, we have reached the end of today's episode. Thank you for taking part in the Vox Juris podcast and for sharing your knowledge and experiences.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the podcast on Spotify, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And I look forward to bringing you more inspiring and insightful stories and guests in the future episodes. Goodbye.